You've been told to show appreciation at work. But what if there was something even more powerful than saying thank you or offering praise? Today's guest says the missing component to making someone truly feel valued is validation. And by the end of this conversation, you'll know exactly how to make your team members feel seen in the workplace. Joining me today is Dr. Caroline Fleck. Caroline is a licensed psychologist, corporate consultant, and an adjunct clinical instructor at Stanford University. She's the author of Validation: How the Skill Set That Revolutionized Psychology Will Transform Your Relationships, Increase Your Influence, and Change Your Life. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I share new episodes and other tips for managers every week. Now, here's the conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Caroline. I'm so excited to talk about the concepts in your book, Validation, and just talk about what it means to validate people, what it means to feel validated, why it's so important, and how we as managers can do more of that in the workplace.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get started, I just want to tell everyone who's listening, you need to go get this book because it's an amazing book. It's called Validation. And I read a lot of books for my work and I talk to a lot of authors. And sometimes I'm like, okay, your book is great. And sometimes I'm like, oh, no. Listeners, you need to get this book. So I'm actually telling you, get this book. Go to the show notes and get this book. Okay. Sorry for the detour. Now, what is validation? Why don't we just start with the definition of what is it?
Yeah, I'm so glad to start there actually, because I want to correct the myth that validation is praise. So we often are told that we should not seek validation or we shouldn't seek external validation. This is and I'm just going to be real, especially women. We get this message a lot. And validation, I just want to say at the top, it is not praise. So validation is simply a way of communicating that you're there, you get it, and you care. So a validating response is one that shows mindfulness, understanding, and empathy. And that's it. Okay. The person who feels validated, if you are successful in validating someone, they will in turn feel accepted. So it's kind of the language of acceptance, or how to really send the message that I see you, I hear you. This is different from praise, which is a judgment, right? Praise says, I like you, or I like how you perform. Validation says, I accept you independent of how you look or perform.
Oh my goodness, this is so important. And I think we're in a moment in time, we've kind of been in this moment where everyone's just like, I want to feel seen. I want to feel heard. I want to feel like my presence matters here. And pulling apart appreciation and praise, which we as managers think about a lot of how do I show appreciation? How do I give praise? How do I make sure people know that I value them? Which is really different than what you're saying now, which is just you do have to do those things. But there's also this piece of it that's you just want to make your people feel seen and heard and that their presence matters.
It also gets at the heart of this concept of psychological safety. So, we've got now decades of research on psychological safety, and we know that folks who are on teams or in companies in which there is a high degree of psychological safety, those individuals perform better, earn more, are less likely to quit their jobs. So anything that can secure or increase psychological safety is going to be good for business. Okay. And validation is probably the most surefire way to do that. Because at the end of the day, psychological safety is this just simply the degree to which you feel accepted and like you belong in the team or group that you're in. And again, that pretty much comes down to validation.
Let's go back for a second because you said there were 3 components to validation. Can you unpack those for us?
As psychologists, of course, we like to have our very kind of brainy definitions. And we think about validation as the communication that one is mindful, understands, and empathizes with some part of another person's experience, thereby accepting it as valid. Or as I like to put it simply, validation shows that you're there, you get it, and you care. So to be there, to be mindful, the key quality there is that of non-judgment. So you're simply paying attention in a way that communicates engagement, but not judgment. Understanding requires some degree of logical understanding. In other words, I can see the validity in what you're saying. I see the logic. I see how you got there. And then a step up from there is if we're able to also demonstrate empathy, which really is like emotional understanding, if you think about it, right? I can relate. I get it. And so with validation, let's be honest, you may not be able to do all of that all the time when you're talking to someone. I don't always empathize and understand the perspectives of those that I'm speaking with. Okay. But at the bare minimum, I can be mindful. If you're able to communicate that mindfulness in such a way, we would consider that to be a low level of validation, right? So you should always be able to validate somebody in some capacity to some degree. It's just a matter of to what extent.
Can you maybe paint us a picture here or share some stories and kind of, or show us kind of the differences between how you might validate through being present versus how you might validate more towards empathy?
Yeah. So if I'm sitting across from somebody whose political views I wildly disagree with, I am unlikely to be able to empathize, maybe straight out the gate, with where they're coming from, because I feel very differently. What I can do at the bare minimum is to stay engaged. And with validation, I teach 8 different skills that you can use to communicate varying degrees of validation. So if you just wanted, if you could, all you could do is that bare minimum of be engaged, there's 2 skills you can use. The first is attending, and the second is copying. And I'll talk about copying, I think, because it's easier to grasp. It is so easy to grasp. It is literally just repeating what somebody has said to you or copying their body language. And this sounds mechanical and this sounds weird. And this is one of the most effective things you can do to establish a connection with people. We are hardwired to copy. As babies, we copy the facial expressions of our parents. When we like or are attracted to somebody, we naturally copy their body language without even realizing it. In so doing, we activate mirror neurons. So this process that we come by naturally of copying folks actually enables us to feel some of what they are feeling. And as such, it can help generate both cognitive understanding and emotional empathy. So if I'm talking with somebody and I don't have much to give in terms of understanding or empathy, I'm not there yet, I can at least repeat what they have said. I can highlight the key words that stood out to them as most important. And I can even copy their subtle body language.
So that's an easy technique that everyone can try when you're sitting in a meeting and you're talking to a colleague and you want them to feel more comfortable. Maybe you're having a difficult conversation, right? What does it look like when you're leaning more into the understanding or the empathy part? What are some of those skills?
One of the most powerful understanding skills, and this is like a Jedi mind trick. Okay. So this really is a skill you have to develop, is the ability to intuit what somebody else might be thinking or feeling based on what they've said. So if somebody is expressing frustration over having worked all weekend on redoing code or something, redoing a project because somebody else screwed it up, I might be able to intuit that this person is frustrated, that they're disappointed. And so if I was to say, oh man, you must be so disappointed that you had to do this. You must be feeling burnt out. Okay. If I hit something that resonates with them, that can be very validating. Obviously, I understand if I'm able to communicate insights that they haven't yet surfaced. Obviously, if you screw that up, it can go sideways, right? If I say like, you must be so jealous of all of us who were like, chilling on the weekend. And they're like, I guess, like, right? That could be problematic. So the higher you go, or in other words, kind of the more deeply you attempt to validate someone, oftentimes the worse it will be if it goes south. Like the more you'll end up kind of invalidating or showing that you don't see or understand them, right? If you don't land the message. So that one, it is a great skill. I've got all sorts of thoughts on how to help folks develop it, but that is a way of communicating more of an understanding.
I often, try to take the practices I'm learning at work and like apply them to my children. And
Yes.
After reading your book, I tried that with my daughter who was upset and was crying in the bathroom at school over not wanting to present in class because she didn't feel prepared, even though she was totally prepared. And I said to her, I'm like, oh, that must have been so embarrassing to be like in the bathroom crying with like, all the other kids around, whatever. And she was like, it wasn't embarrassing at all. She was like, I was just angry at my teachers. And I was like, okay. So I tried to interpret what she was experiencing and I got it wrong and she corrected me. And I was like, oh, okay. That sucks to have teachers who don't get it. It feels like with understanding and leaning into that, where if you can open the door and you have a good relationship, maybe they'll help redirect you. And so that can continue to support that validating rather than kind of take it off onto a left turn.
So you did something really wise there, which I would say most people don't do. When they get it wrong or when they strike out trying to go for kind of like a higher level of validation, when we do that and it's not received well or we're corrected, as your daughter corrected you, there can be a sense of like, we want to shut down. We feel kind of discouraged or punished. And so we want to pull back. And that is a mistake. So if you fail to communicate understanding, just go back to being mindful, right? Just go back to, as you did, kind of copying or reflecting back what she had said. I talk in the book a lot about watching Oprah because Oprah has this down, and validation, it's a skill set. Part of mastering that method is knowing how to use these techniques of kind of going for a higher level of validation, striking out and then going back down. And then how do you shoot back up? And there's a whole method to it. But that is exactly what you did in that moment. You got shot down. You took it down a notch. You found some resonance there, and then you proceeded.
And all this only for reading your book, which is why everyone should go out and get your book, because it really is very easy to apply. Okay, let's talk about why actually does this matter? Like what changes when people feel validated? Like why as a manager would I want to do, like spend the time to develop these skills?
Validation is the most important quality of any relationship. And I will say that full stop. We don't think about it in those terms. We don't talk about it in those terms, but that is a fact. It is the single greatest predictor of factors including relationship quality, relationship satisfaction, longevity, across all sorts of relationships, not just with kids, not just with spouses or partners, not just with colleagues, but across the board. So when used at work in particular, what validation does is it takes the connection beyond just the work. You're not just commenting on the work, which is what we tend to do, obviously, in professional settings. It's about the work. So we compliment the work. We praise the work. We rarely validate the person behind the work because that feels intimate, right? And there's something weird kind of about that, or at least we've been led to believe that there are lines that should be maintained. And yes, there are obvious boundaries that should be maintained at work. However, seeing and accepting and helping people feel heard and seen is a line that you should not maintain. You want to cross that. You want to extend. And so I think we tend to play it a little bit too cautiously for fear of being too intimate. But in so doing, we fail to see the people across from us.
I'm wondering if you have any stories of clients you've worked with or your own experiences from just what happens when someone is kind of doing it wrong and then the flip to doing it right.
So I do executive coaching, and I was working with a client. The CEO of the company was frustrated that there had been some problems kind of down the line that essentially resulted in one person having to come in over a holiday break for what was supposed to be a 2 or 3 week kind of hiatus after a huge crunch time. This person had to come in and correct a whole bunch of code. And so they spent their holiday break stuck in the office. And obviously the CEO felt very bad about this. This is a startup. His inclination was to layer on the praise for the job that was done. This is excellent. We couldn't have done this without you. On and on and on and on, which is fine. And as we were meeting, I said, you did a great job of praising the work, but did you validate the person? And he said, like, what would that look like in this situation? Well, what do you imagine that person felt having had to come in while everybody else was off? Okay, well, he probably felt crappy. He may have felt taken advantage of. He may be resentful. Okay, so say all of that. Like, what would you want to hear in that situation? And so I had him go back, circle back around to that employee, and say, "Hey, I wanted to follow up. Awesome work on the code, but I also imagine you feel pretty burnt out at this point and disappointed. And if I were in your shoes, I'd be really worried that this was going to happen again. And so here's the process that we're putting in place to ensure that we have a checks and balance system that doesn't lead to this happening again." And in that moment, he described just the connection, the relief that he saw on this person's face. That's what I'm talking about. So it's not even like there would have been a huge loss. I mean, it's not like there would have been some great damage if he hadn't done that. But in doing it, he took this experience that would have otherwise been really quite negative for this individual and used it to strengthen the relationship, decrease the person's burnout, and increase their motivation and trust in the company. And that is what validation does.
So powerful and so credible. And like what I noticed is that he didn't say, "I'm so sorry you had to do this," right?
Mm-hmm.
It was, "This must have been frustrating for you," right? Which is a different way to say something. And I think it's, I don't even know what, you probably know better than I do as a psychologist, but like when someone's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry that you're feeling this way. Like, I'm so sorry that you had to do this thing that I know wasn't fun for you." It doesn't feel nearly as good as when what you're describing is they're actually just validating what you're feeling. They're not telling you that they're sorry. You're getting like what you're experiencing.
That is such a good catch, because the whole "I'm sorry" thing, it can sound like it's coming from our own kind of selfish motivation to decrease our sense of guilt. You know, we know that we need to correct here. And so we're doing that, we're checking that box. It's not really looking necessarily at the situation from the other person's point of view, right? It's hearing what they need to hear rather than what you feel like you need to say. That is so frustrating when folks come to us with their big apology just to get it off their chest so that they can feel better. That's a really important distinction. And I absolutely agree. Validation is the tool I use to thread that needle.
Another piece of this that I think is an important nuance is that you said validation is not praise or appreciation. It's also not agreement, which I thought was such an important nuance in the book around you can still validate someone even when you don't agree with them, right? Which is different than,
right.
Even like it's very clear, like if you're having a big conflict, but you don't agree with someone. But sometimes you're working on something small and you're just like, I don't like that idea. Like, that's not where we want to take this project. Or no, like, this is not the right decision here. And how can you validate in those moments when, going back to psychological safety, you want people to keep throwing out ideas, challenging things, and you don't agree with them, but you also don't want to dismiss them?
I talk about this a little bit in the book. I'm a vegetarian and I was a vegan for a while for like animal reasons. And I've experienced this to be like a real divide between me and other people. And it would often come up like in work contexts where, someone would bring in some food or something to share. And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm a vegetarian." And immediately would feel like there's this divide, right? There's us versus them. And of course we're at work. So like, you don't really want to get into the politics of everything. And like, and yet I wanted to close that separation that was created. And so when I used to talk to people about this issue, I'm very passionate about animals and I have very strong beliefs here. And I don't agree with like perhaps counter arguments on why you should eat meat. And so I would really front load and I'd come prepared with all of my facts and all of my data. I actually had in my wallet this is so embarrassing. I don't have a great memory. And so I had this little like cue card. This was like before the days of smartphones. Okay. I had this little like cue card of facts that I had like printed out so that I'd be prepared for this conversation. Okay. How obnoxious is this? Like already? Okay. That wasn't changing anyone's opinion, BTW, and it was creating more of a divide. So I was thinking like, I'm just going to win everyone over with my great facts. And like, then we'll all be vegetarians together and that'll be the fix. No, the divide got bigger. So eventually I switched tactics and I started to actually validate. Like, there's a ton of valid reasons why somebody would want to eat meat. Okay. I completely actually get that. It is infinitely easier. It is infinitely, in some cases more affordable. I can see tons of valid reasons why somebody would choose to be a meat eater. And when I open with that, even though I don't agree with it, even though I have my counterpoints, when I open with that understanding, when I try to decrease the distance between us, that facilitates dialogue, or at the very least, it helps us avoid conflict. Now, if I wanted to change their opinion, maybe I would, provide my facts at some point. But just opening straight out the gate, being able to say like, yeah, I see the validity in why you are choosing to pursue this direction with the project. That makes total sense. I mean, given X, Y, and Z, yada, 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 like I totally see where you're coming from. I don't have to agree in order to see the wisdom or the validity in someone's perspective. So it really is forcing you to kind of look for that kernel of truth in another person's experience rather than what's wrong with it. Because we love what's wrong. It's like this shiny thing that we can't turn away from. And validation really is about developing the skill or the ability to see what's right.
I feel like when you can kind of shift off some of that negative, I hear this idea and instantly I can tell you the 5 reasons why this is a bad idea. And you can shift it to the like, what about this could be a good idea? What perspective is this person have that I'm missing that they think this is a good idea? And maybe I need to understand more. And you can get such better thinking into the room when we look for what's valid and we open that conversation instead of shutting it down. So it feels like this is such an important way to engage with our team members, not just in like regular conversations, but especially in meetings where there's decisions being made and problems being solved and conflict at hand and just all of that.
Yeah, I'd add there's this thing that happens when you state somebody else's reasons for them. It pulls out this whole back and forth that would otherwise happen that eats up a lot of time. Like if I'm able to make your points before you have to make them, I'm pulling out any need for defensiveness on your part. I already see whatever it is you would want me to see. And that goes a long way to doing this like back and forth. Here's my thing. Now you rebuttal. Now my thing. Now you rebuttal. Like if I open with your rebuttal, there's not going to be much of a back and forth.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
All right. Say you wanted me to talk about psychological safety, which is a concept I know a fair bit about, but it's not my area of expertise. You say, Caroline, I know we were supposed to do this podcast interview about validation. That's what your book is about. That's what you're an expert on. But psychological safety is trending. It is all over Instagram right now. There was some big article, something big happened. We're going to change the topic of that. Can we just focus on psychological safety today? I could say, no, I don't want to talk about psychological safety. That's not what I'm here to do. That's not what we agreed to. You would come back with, I understand, but, I think it really actually connects to validation because da, 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 da. And then I come back and we do this dance back and forth and it's very unproductive and we both feel stressed out. If instead I say, oh my gosh, I totally see where your thinking is. Yes, I read that article this morning in the Wall Street Journal about, psychological safety. And it does kind of relate to validation because of this, that, and the other. Yeah, I totally get it. Unfortunately, I'm not your person. If you want to find someone else, I know a couple of other folks who are into that. Here's their names or whatever. I'm not that person. I've just kind of taken the air out of that balloon. Like if I've deflated what would otherwise be this tense situation. Does that make sense? By kind of like leading with, I see where you're coming from.
Yes, very much so. And I can see how doing that in a meeting or in a conversation with someone can totally transform what that conversation looks like because you're kind of not in defensive mode anymore.
That's right.
Neither of you are having to defend your positions. Instead, you're actually like trying to find some common ground.
Yes. Oh, and can I share a really powerful thing with your listeners? Because I think this is great. If you're using this in a meeting or doing what we're talking about here, which is to kind of front load with what you see in the other person's perspective, the validity that you see, just leave it at that. Don't follow up with the but, because when you start doing that, people are they're waiting for the but. They kind of like, I see what you're doing. Let me hear the but. Just let it land. So just like if I was to just leave it at like, that makes perfect sense. Yes, I see how this connects to validation. And I read that article. Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. And if I just left it at that, you then would say, okay, so what do you think? And then I could say, well, it's not my jam. But by leaving out the but, that simple move of just like full stop, period, after the validation has it land in such a more powerful and effective way. So I know, again, we're just like, we can't wait to get our points out there. Like we're so prepared and we're so terrified that the other person is going to think we're agreeing with them because we acknowledge the validity in what they're saying. The reality is you have plenty of space to share your opinion. It doesn't have to be within the exact same sentence in which you try to validate someone.
Such a good tip. Thank you so much for that. Okay. But we have to wrap up. So Caroline, can you tell us about a great manager that you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
Yes, this takes me way back to my days as a research assistant. I worked for a great clinician named Jackie Gollin, and she was a woman, and I was a young woman in coming into the field. She was a psychologist. I was just out of college. And again, I have just like never felt so seen by someone and at the same time so inspired, which is a really interesting combination to feel both accepted and yet motivated to change, right? In some way, like I wanted to be more like her. I wanted her integrity. I wanted her devotion to her clients or her patients. I wanted her confidence. And yet at the same time, I felt completely seen in who I was and protected within that space. I had all sorts of anxieties and, just weird awkwardness having this be my first job out of college. And she just spoke to all of it before I said anything or without me having to say anything. And so in so doing, I felt deeply accepted and then again, simultaneously motivated or inspired to be better.
And where can people learn more about you, keep up with your work, get a copy of your book?
Yes, please check out my website, drcarolinefleck.com. I have a lot of background and bonus material on the book. You can find my book wherever you get books, Amazon, Audible, Barnes & Noble, you name it. And I'm on social media at drcarolinefleck.com on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the things.
Thank you again so much. The whole concept, I just feel like, is a missing component of what's happening in work. And so thank you so much for spreading your insights.
Thank you. Thank you.